Kratos holds for a moment, hovering hesitant over a handprint in a tree, a moment of quiet reflection unburdened by context before the reins are finally handed over to the player and God of War begins proper. You learn to swing your axe before you even walk. A prompt appears, a trigger is pulled, a wound deepens, a leviathan felled. It is only at this point that we're finally introduced to Atreus, almost as an afterthought. A cold, formal interaction between the pair as you carry a once mighty oak back to your homestead, no real indication of the bond these two share, or what they've lost. This opening section that begins with a felled tree and ends with a snapped neck seems like a perfect reintroduction to a familiar story. God of War has grown up, its approach to storytelling maturing into something that acknowledges its former self, yet throws that hypermasculine cowl to the wind. An emotional journey that pushes ever forward, away from the bloodshed that had come to define the franchise and towards some semblance of redemption for its grizzled, tormented protagonist. Only this isn't really true, is it? It's a facade, one that quickly withers to reveal a game not all that unlike its hyper-violent predecessors. A game that trades juvenile viscera for solemn prestige and yet offers the player essentially the same experience. Because a hesitant hand ends up saying a lot about its owner, but in this instant, it is the God of War's hand alone. There's a great schism between the poignancy of the narrative and the central means of player interaction. You cut down the tree. The game shows a young boy grieving for his late mother. You guide Atreus' bow in order to strike a majestic stag. The game takes over to show a moment of fragile bonding between father and son. This distinction carries throughout the game, an intensely personal and intimate journey that allows your input only by fist and axe. There's an obstacle in your way? Better hoof this artifact inherited from your dead wife at it. Can't scale a steep cliff face? Chuck your tiny vulnerable son up there. Even the simple act of opening a chest, a role-playing cliché oft framed with awe and expectation, is reduced to a sharp act of brutality as our gruff, hirsute protagonist punches his way through to the goodies inside. This is a game that has violence intrinsically at the core of its language. It teases intimacy, but pulls back its hand at the last moment in order to slap a wedge of steel through a Draug's face. While an up-close and personal audience to Kratos' grief, rage, and ultimately the pursuit of peace, we are also the hand that guides his destructive path through a world that seems only hostile for his presence within it. While there is a semi-valid argument to be made about the lack of versatility in God of War's verbs being a deliberate artistic choice, a reflection of a character mentally unable to pass his life in any other way, it illuminates the recent history of gaming's AAA works seeking to emulate the prestige of their peers, but not quite getting it. There has been a presence of this more thoughtful and capital M mature gaming experience throughout, of course, but in recent hardware generations we've seen a boom. The world looked at titles like BioShock and The Last of Us, experiences aping the worlds of cinema and literature, and thought, this is how we do things now. We had tales of loss, heartache and vengeance, fractured worlds kept barely together by withered notions of hope and love. We had luscious damsels in distress replaced by parental bonds, horny pursuit exchanged with quiet nights in, and yet, in hindsight, these changes felt ever so paper thin. With, as always, some noted exceptions, we had a new generation of expensive, well-written games that had you still engaged with their stories exclusively via gun barrel and blade. Serious, mature storytelling remained just that, the story. And a lot of the time, if we're being totally honest, it wasn't all that mature. The discord between Fable and Medium saw the AAA industry repeatedly failing to learn the real lessons of its best works. And so when another big, bombastic narrative epoch emerges that offers no means of interaction other than a clenched fist, a collective groan inevitably follows. there must be more to interaction other than taking the lives of digital strangers. This all comes back round to the man who was stopped in his tracks by a handprint. A man who knew his son deserved a more gentle touch but just could not deliver. A man who vehemently and aggressively opposed the journey that he is eventually forced to embark on for fear of his flesh and blood walking the same dark path as him. That same parental figure who ends the life of almost every man and beast that dares cross his path, who rewards the reluctant allyship of the goddess of love and fertility by killing her son. A man who, at the conclusion of a drawn-out, tiresome journey marked throughout with violence, sheds his bloody bandages, casts his late wife's ashes to the mountain winds, and almost immediately proceeds to tell his child a story of war. Games deserve a broader language set, more means by which a player can express themselves and interact with the gorgeous worlds imagined by many minds. Embrace your allies, admire the view, cook a hearty meal, read a book, pet a dog, pet many dogs, pet even more dogs. What I'm really trying to get at with this argument is that death and destruction in a vacuum is a boring prospect. It's not a question of censoring gratuity, but rather understanding its role as one aspect of a wider matrix. The best works use violence as sparse punctuation, and even a game based around mass deicide could learn from that. It might make sense for God of War's tormented protagonist to have such a narrow understanding of how we can interact with the world, but there could have been other ways to explore that, or at the very least some sense that there is something else at the finish line other than more things to hack apart. Because to my mind, if the destination is indistinguishable from the origin, then what was the point of the journey? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Santa Monica Studios knew exactly what they were doing with this discord between game and story, intending to prove a point regardless of the actual success of the execution. Maybe as an unwed single man with no children, I've misunderstood the challenges of fatherhood or the obstacles of grief, that being charged with protecting the life you brought into the world doesn't always change who you are or your capacity for empathy. Maybe I'm projecting my frustrations about the relationship I have with my own family and friends, wishing always for tender embrace, yet failing to recognize that love comes in many forms, even if it isn't always vocalized. Maybe I'm just angry because, despite my desires, who I am and who Kratos is are incompatible, mutually exclusive entities, and at the end of the day, in guiding the gruff behemoth through mountains and across lakes, between realms and to the ends of the earth, as much as I have become endeared to this sweet, curious, troubled child who has stayed by my side throughout, Atreus is not my son.
I don't understand. I know saving her was the right thing, but she seemed all evil at the end.
Not evil. You killed her son, lad. Her son. The death of a child is not something a parent gets over easily.
But he was gonna kill her.
She would have died to see him live. Only a parent can understand.
So you'd let me kill you?
If it meant you would live. Yes.
Look, there was no easy choice. For anybody.